Again, good morning and welcome to Expanding the Movement, Incarcerated Male Survivors. My name is Juliana Baez and I am with the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I am one of the training and technical assistance specialists and I focus a lot of my time in providing TA support under the California Advancing PREA project. And today I'm going to be co-presenting with my partner, Matthew Van Winkle. Matthew?
Hi, Juliana, and good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Matthew Van Winkle. I'm a program officer with Just Detention International. And it's an honor to be able to present to you today. As many of you know, Just Detention International, or JDI for short, is a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual violence in all forms of detention. It's JDI's fundamental belief that when the government takes away someone's freedom, it then takes on an absolute responsibility to protect that person's safety. So no matter what crime someone has committed, rape should never be part of the penalty.
Thank you, Matthew. And the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or CACASA, is committed to ending sexual violence through a multifaceted approach of prevention, intervention, education, research, advocacy, and public policy. At CACASA, we provide leadership, vision, and resources to rape crisis centers, other entities committed to ending sexual violence. We envision a world free from sexual abuse. Now, in this third year of the California Advancing PREA project, CalOES has again funded us and allows us to work together in partnership with JDI in offering support and guidance to the California Rape Crisis Centers on building strong relationships with CDCR. And we also want to help create sustainable agreements and protocols for the provision of victim services to survivors. And earlier in the project, the California Advancing PREA team focused on fundamental culture change on both the corrections and the advocacy side. Over time, we've put many MOUs in place between CDCR facilities and then local RCCs. We provide technical training and assistance wherever it's needed. And although much progress has been made, we understand that there continues to be a gap and challenge in the services available to survivors behind bars.
And the California Advancing PREA project has three main goals. First, to help advocates and prison staff understand each other's roles and culture. Rape crisis advocates come from a trauma-informed position. Corrections staff can sometimes seem more focused simply on rules enforcement and punishment. Order, more of a militarized culture. The second goal is to build the capacity of both rape crisis centers and prisons to provide trauma-informed services to survivors. And this is a process you've all already been a part of, bringing more access to the services you provide to the people housed in California state facilities. And last, the goal is to develop a program of services for survivors that is sustainable, meaning we want to establish deep and lasting communication and professional ties between advocates and their facilities so that these services can go on even if the project should someday end.
Thank you, Matthew. And we can't emphasize enough the importance of self-care. Today we'll be sharing some stories from survivors as well and other systems of oppression. So please practice self-care during the presentation. Take a deep breath, step away from the computer, mute us if you have to, have a quick check-in with your team if needed. And I'd like to share a little bit about our agenda today. Today we're going to have conversations of basics of mass incarceration. We are also going to discuss male victims of sexual assault in detention. We're going to hear from our amazing peer leaders and their perspective in the work they're doing when servicing male survivors behind bars. And take a little bit of time to expanding the movement and see how the services that we're providing to male survivors is important for the work that we're doing. And we'll have some time for additional resources and questions as well. Now, we know that America leads the world in incarceration, and over the past several decades, the country has built the largest prison population in the entire world, with the second highest prison population per capita, behind a tiny African county of Seychelles. But now let's talk a little bit about how we got this way as well. Here in the, under the California Advancing Career Project, we love infographics, so you'll see these in our presentations over and over. We hope that they help represent and show a picture of the information that we're providing. This one says that over 2.3 million adults and 70,000 youth are incarcerated in U.S. prisons, jails, and youth detention facilities. The rate of incarceration now is 5 times higher than it was historically, and nowhere in the world incarcerates more than we do. America has the highest incarceration rate both by capita and by simple numbers, with almost 1 million more inmates in China, which has the second highest number of prisoners. And we hope that you had an opportunity to watch the video that we sent, the links that we sent last week or so on by The Atlantic on mass incarceration. We hope that it allowed you to understand, to give you an introduction in describing the problem of mass incarceration in our country and how it impacts particular communities of color in destructive, oppressive ways. The video just scratches the surface of what is a much larger topic, and we encourage you to take advantage of some of the resources available for learning more about this. We'll provide some suggestions for further learning at the end of this webinar. One quote that we took from the video was, "We no longer incarcerate the individual, but we're incarcerating whole social groups." And somehow, while in America represents a mere 5% of the global population, it is home to 25% of the world's prisoners. The reason for this are a perfect storm of our country's slaveholding past, systemic racism, and a lack of consistency in how laws are applied. All too often, we see law enforcement over-enforce and over-patrol communities of color, turning a blind eye to crimes perpetrated by white communities. Adding mandatory sentences minimums for nonviolent offenses such as drug possessions, a crime which brown and white people commit about the same rate. And it's easy to see white prison populations crowded with black and brown bodies. And this is all, seen with the boom in the late 20th centuries. At this time, I would like to see if there are any thoughts in regards to the video that we share. Is there any thoughts from our audience on mass incarceration? All right, seems like we don't have any thoughts, but that's okay. Having the discussion of mass incarceration can be a little challenging. It could cause or trigger different feelings. So if at any point you feel like you want to provide your thoughts, questions, please feel free to send that into the chat box. As we mentioned earlier, America has more prisoners per capita than any other country, but the likelihood of being incarcerated at some point in one's life is not the same for all Americans. Overall, black men were 6 times more likely to be in prison than white men, and Latino men were 2.5 more times more likely to be imprisoned than white men, and this is based on the corrections populations in the United States of 2012. Prior to the mass incarceration boom of the 1980s, there were 12 prisons in CDCR Division of Adult Institutions, which is hard to believe since we now have about 35 adult prisons. This is all accounted from the boom in prisons, where in the year of 1987 through 1997, 18 prisons were added to California.
Thank you, Juliana, for that background about mass incarceration in this country. Now for the next section, male victims of sexual assault in detention, I want to explain something. That in today's webinar, you may hear us using the word victims alternately with survivors to describe men and boys who have been sexually violated in detention. And that's a decision we made with a lot of intention and after some discussion. We chose to use victim alternate with survivor not to disempower anyone, but instead to acknowledge that men and boys are being victimized and that they're trapped in a system that makes surviving and thriving all the more difficult. So these two terms have very different meanings and implications, obviously, but those who identify as victims and those who identify as survivors are alike in the fact that they were harmed and their need for allyship and support is the same. So it might not be so surprising to learn that the vast majority, 90% in fact, of prisoners in the United States are male. So we shouldn't be too surprised to learn that the vast majority of those who experience sexual assault while incarcerated are male as well. And to put this into a California focus, there are 35 adult facilities in the CDCR system, and 32 of those house men exclusively. The California male prisoner population is over 121,000. And in contrast, there are slightly fewer than 6,000 female California state inmates. And youth detention facilities almost match adult facilities when it comes to the proportion of boys incarcerated versus that of girls. 86% of youth in residential placement are male. Just as we see in adult facilities, residents in youth detention are disproportionately Black and Latino. And many of these teens are held not because they're judged to be a danger to society, but simply because they can't afford court fees. Many find themselves entering the system for simple status offenses, such as truancy, not being in school. In other words, things that are not considered crimes for adults. They've suffered trauma already, even at this young age, and all too many find it impossible to exit this pipeline that will one day find them feeding the population of adult prisons and jails. As this infographic here shows, Juliana said we love our infographics. That's true, we have to admit it. 1 in 11 former inmates in men's state prisons reported being sexually abused behind bars. Contrary to depictions in popular media and the public perception, the rates of abuse perpetrated by staff on inmates is almost equal with the rate of inmate on inmate abuse. So it's almost a 50-50 split. And another fact that goes against the popular perception is that more than half of all substantiated instances of staff misconduct were committed by female staff on male inmates. Substantiated is a term meaning that proof was found to back up the reported crime. Even in a scenario where the male inmate might appear willing, we have to always remember that a prisoner has no meaningful way to give or deny consent. Prisoners' privileges, work assignments, options for early release, even their ability to see their families depend on those who hold the power, the staff of the facility. Juliana?
Yeah, and we in the community in this Me Too movement are dealing very much with the effects of toxic masculinity and male violence. But it's important to remember when dealing with incarcerated male victims of sexual abuse that in the majority of cases involving staff perpetrators, the perpetrator will have been a female. In society at large, 79% of men who are made to penetrate someone else, which is a form of rape, reported female perpetrators. Likewise, most men who experience sexual coercion or unwanted sexual contact have female perpetrators. Female perpetrators of sexual abuse in detention is a huge topic and one that needs more focus than we will have time for today. But we hope to devote future conversations to this subject.
Yeah, and here on this slide, again, we see the data for juvenile facilities nearly matches the data for adult facilities. Here we see that 1 in 10 males in juvenile facilities reported being sexually abused while in detention. Of that number, slightly more than 89% were males reporting sexual activity with female staff. And 3% were males reporting sexual activity with both male and female staff.
And other things to keep in mind is that, as mentioned above, while in adult prison, sexual assault is just as likely to be committed by another inmate as it is by a staff member, in juvenile detention, it's 80% of perpetrators who are staff. So this is where we hear the 50-50, where in adult prisons, 50% of the perpetrator could be a staff and 50% could be an inmate. When in juvenile detentions, 80% of the perpetrators tend to be staff, while only 20% tend to be other youth.
Now let's hear from Troy. Troy was abused by a fellow resident at a juvenile facility. He was forced to perform oral sex on an older boy who promised to protect him from others, but didn't. Troy is now free and a member of JDI's Survivor Council, but this abuse was extremely traumatic for him, which he suffered as a boy. As he puts it, being attacked and not receiving support from the adults in charge turned my world upside down. I take that with me wherever I go.
Now, those who become prisoner rape victims are typically the most vulnerable members of the population in custody. Thinking about all the different sorts of people that comprise the male inmate population, what are some traits or characteristics that might make one inmate more at risk for victimization while incarcerated? If anyone would like to share their thoughts on what identified traits might put a male prisoner at greater risk for sexual abuse, you can type those in the chat window. So we would definitely like to hear what our audience thinks are those traits.
Yeah, no wrong thoughts. Don't be scared.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Susan. Having a mental illness. And male victims are often, that might be at risk, are often those who are gay or bisexual inmates, inmates with mental illnesses, survivors of previous trauma, first-timers or nonviolent offenders, those who are small or shy, and experienced in the ways of a prison life, right? Those with physical disabilities as well. And when we talk about minorities, those in the minority, we're talking about those who are not in the majority in detention or where they're housed, so they can not belong to a gang or not be part of the bigger population. We can see that a lot of the same factors on this list might put a non-incarcerated person or male at risk as well. We see a lot of mirroring of violence and dynamics in detention with what happens in the community. And thank you for those responses. Those are all amazing responses.
Yes, thank you for typing in your answers there. We do love it when it's a little bit interactive, and never feel like you really can type in. It's not rude to type in while we're talking. We'll see it and we'll be able to get to your thought as soon as we can. So Pedro is an inmate at a prison in Wisconsin. He shared his story via a letter in the hopes that others might gain insight into his experience and the traumatic effects that result from being sexually assaulted. These are Pedro's own words, a little bit condensed for the purposes of this training. When he was assaulted, he discovered that his body had a freeze response, and he wasn't able to defend himself or even vocalize to call for help. As he puts it, in the middle of the night, while I was sleeping, my cellmate raped me. I woke up not realizing what was going on. I had what seemed like a million thoughts running through my mind. Should I scream for help? Even though I had all these different thoughts, I didn't do anything. I just froze. My body began to shake uncontrollably. I felt disgusted with myself for just lying there. I felt like an object, not a human being.
Thank you for sharing Pedro's story, Matthew. And because of Pedro's story, we understand the importance of the work that you all are doing as advocates, and we actually wanted to spend some time in this web conference and hear from our peer leaders. Our peer leaders are a group of rape crisis centers who were able to participate in a different way in the California Advancing PREA project. Our peer leaders are committed actually to provide comprehensive services to incarcerated survivors under the project. They're participating in peer learning opportunities. They're providing feedback on best practices and share experiences with the team. And they're also committed to build sustainability and within their organization to support incarcerated survivors, which is what you all are doing as well. But they were able to do it in a more individualized, I guess, part with us as well. So we were actually able to ask our peer leaders a few questions. We asked them to share with us some of the differences between working with incarcerated men versus men in the community, to tell us about a challenge they've encountered and how they overcame that while providing services to male survivors, and what they've learned about working with the incarcerated population, as well as to things to consider when doing this work. And I would like to introduce Weave. Weave is located in Northern California in the Sacramento area. Weave provides services to Folsom State Prison and CSP Sacramento. And today we have Jenica, our amazing advocate. Welcome, Jenica.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for having us. Hi.
No, thanks for being here today. So
Wonderful.
Jessica, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Would you, can you share a little bit about the differences between working with incarcerated men and versus men in the community?
Sure, absolutely. So, you know, as a lot of us know, when men are reporting sexual violence, or when they're considering reporting sexual violence, they're afraid to, due to, you know, myths around who gets raped, or stigma, or cultural standards around masculinity and homophobia. There's a lot wrapped into masculinity around reporting as a male survivor. And then even for incarcerated survivors, this is further compounded by increased isolation, prison culture, lack of compassionate resources, or fear of not being believed, fear of retaliation. Incarcerated survivors might not have the support of their loved ones due to their incarceration. You know, oftentimes we see survivors feel like they're a burden to their family on the outside, or like they don't want to hear, you know, what's going on, or they may lack the autonomy to participate in regular self-care or the coping mechanisms they may have while they're not incarcerated, whether that's, you know, healthy coping mechanisms like we talk about taking a bath and all of those things, or what's considered unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as, you know, a drug use, or things that are considered unhealthy by some society.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that and bringing light to that as well, and understanding the culture of their, you know, around their masculinity, and also the lack of resources that they might have available there. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Can you tell us about some of the challenges that you've encountered and how, you know, you've overcome them?
Sure. You know, we've had some challenges in gaining access to providing services to incarcerated survivors at our facilities. So, you know, I'm not sure if it's considered overcoming it, but we celebrate every single small success. And every time we were able to engage with a survivor via letter writing, or when we have, you know, certain meetings set up, and we really are holding on to that hope and continue to advocate for providing services to incarcerated survivors, because nobody deserves to be sexually assaulted. We all believe that. We all know that. I mean, we're still dealing with challenges at various levels, but we continue to hold on to that hope and hold on to that. It's a privilege to do this work, and it's truly we're excited, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue doing this work.
And Jenica, do you have any involvement at your SART meetings from facility staff?
We have actually, yeah. We've had our PCM at Folsom State Prison came down to our SART meeting and participated in that, and we were really excited to have them there.
Well, that's a great success.
Definitely.
Thank you.
And when we are talking about male survivors who are incarcerated, what have you learned about working with them or from the work that you've done with them?
Sure. Consistency and consideration are key. It's really important to find out the details of their world, when day room is for your client, what other groups or classes might they participate in, when commissary comes, when meals are. And while we might not be able to accommodate every single thing, it's really important to try to schedule around their activities since they're limited. Their access to advocates on the outside is really wonderful when we're able to offer it, and it's really important to know their schedule or at least try to accommodate what's important to them. And asking about their schedule and starting that conversation ultimately helps us build rapport and showing interest and respecting how they spend their time.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's great that you mentioned that because, excuse me, we talk about the importance of masculinity, right? And they don't have a lot of control inside the facility as it is. And if you as an advocate are providing this space for, asking these important questions and building that important rapport around their needs and their what they have available, it's crucial as well. Yeah, and can you share a little bit about things that as advocates we need to consider when doing this work with male survivors behind bars?
Sure. Considering, when working with incarcerated male survivors, it's how brave it is for them to even say they'd like to speak with you, or write you a letter. Writing you a letter, speaking with you, may have taken a considerable amount of risk on their part to even reach out to us, knowing that we know that survivors often face retaliation for reporting and further stigmatization as a survivor. Continuing to check in while they've agreed to work with you to begin with, don't hesitate to remind them or check in about how they're feeling about continuing services. They're in ultimate control of continuing advocacy with you, and they have a choice. Even if you feel like that they would like to continue working with you, you have all the signs there that they are gaining something positive from this, asking empowers them to continue making those decisions for themselves.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I think it's important, again, to remember, and we might hear this over and over on assessing the risk, right? By them, just like you mentioned, Jenica, going up to you and seeking these services, it takes a lot, right? So that constant check-in and empowering is crucial as well. Thank you so much, Jenica, for participating, in our discussion, and we are very thankful that WAVE is doing such an amazing job with both their facilities.
Thank you. Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now I would like to introduce Coalition for Family Harmony. Coalition for Family Harmony is in Ventura, California, and Coalition for Family Harmony actually a little bit different than the other peer leaders. They provide services to the Ventura Youth Correctional Facility. And one thing that we do want to highlight is that all of our peer leaders are at different levels. They're all doing different work. They've encountered different challenges, but they've created a community in which they can support each other, even when it comes to maybe the development of a SART response or, speaking to the PCM. So Coalition for Family Harmony is not able to provide in-person services just yet, but they do have an extensive an amazing group of individuals who provide support to male survivors. So we try to incorporate it with the needs of this web conference as well. So I would like to welcome Susan. Susan, are you there with us?
Yes.
Hi, Susan.
Yes.
Welcome.
Hi.
Susan, can you tell us a little bit about, from the Coalition for Family Harmony perspective, the differences between working with maybe, or the experiences that you've done with, had with working with men incarcerated or youth, maybe, to those in the community?
The differences that we've noticed at the coalition when working with formerly incarcerated men or youth is that their self-reports and support groups just highlight the lack of resources that they've had in the facility, and that made it very difficult for them to stay focused on something that was worthwhile and try to preoccupy themselves or, you know, to gain education or knowledge on how to handle the situation.
And, you know, we, like I mentioned, you know, Coalition hasn't been inside the facility as much as we would like for you to be, but can you share a little bit about the challenges and even the needs that you, just the challenges, I guess, in providing these services to male survivors of youth? And you mentioned, you know, groups that of formerly incarcerated males as well.
Right. The largest challenges that we've heard from survivors or, you know, former incarcerated men and youth was that they didn't want to identify as the victim, and there was a lot of traumatic bonding between them. It was hard for them to, to see themselves as a victim. They didn't want to, you know, have the jealousy or the blame, and it was hard, you know, just for them to acknowledge what had happened. That was the biggest challenge.
With the challenges, we highlight the word victim, right? Can you add a little bit more about that? I know we talked about, you know, toxic masculinity, but can you emphasize a little bit more about that?
Just seeing themselves, you know, since they're male, they shouldn't be a victim. It's harder for them, I think, to acknowledge that, just the way society thinks. And then we also found that it was a challenge for them also, like I said earlier, just to have goals once they're in there and having goals that they can actually reach while they're in the facility.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Can you now share with us what you've learned about working with this population?
What we've learned so far with working with formerly incarcerated men and survivors is that they don't want to see themselves as a victim, and it's also very important for them to have an advocate or a clinician to help reinforce what actually took a lot of courage in reminding them that it does take a lot of courage to come out and talk. And also, you know, having them maybe look if it did happen in childhood, you know, acknowledging that it wasn't their fault and not shaming them.
Great, thank you. And how about some things to consider when doing this work? I know you mentioned, you know, meeting the survivor where they are, right? You know, take account the stereotypes and the myths, but what would be other things that Coalition feels like we should consider when doing this work?
The things we consider are that we offer resources, we have support groups, we have advocates, also housing services, maybe HUD or EDD. We help with employment for them once they're out to help them move forward so that it helps prevent them from re-victimization.
And again, I know that some of the resources that Coalition is mentioning are those, you know, services outside. So I'm going to emphasize that, you know, their services right now are more for formerly incarcerated survivors than those who are inside detention, but we always want to take or keep in mind the resources available depending on their location and where they are. So thank you for sharing that, Susan, and thank you for being part of this discussion as well. And now I would like to introduce RCS Fresno. RCS Fresno is in Fresno, California. They actually provide services to Pleasant Valley State Prison. And from Fresno, we have Claudia. Welcome, Claudia.
Good morning. Julia's here, our operations director as well.
Hi, Julia.
Hi.
So thank you for joining us again. And, you know, can you guys share a little bit on the differences between the work that you're doing with male survivors behind bars and those in the community?
Yeah, so some of the things that we found, the differences between working with incarcerated men versus men in the community is that our victims who are incarcerated, their concerns are more for their safety. They also have, whereas our men in the community are more concerned with shame and with coming forward. Or incarcerated survivors, they also have less access to services. They have, whereas our community men, they're able to walk in or call us, call the hotline to be able to receive crisis counseling. That is not the same for our incarcerated survivors. They also have less. They also have limited ability to. They have restrictions to the limited ability to cope, whereas our men out in the community can go out for a hike or a walk. Or incarcerated survivors are a little bit more limited because they're in a cell, and there's only a certain time that they're able to leave their cell. So that's another difference. They also have, our incarcerated survivors have a less assurance of confidentiality, where our men in the community are able to walk in and receive services, and the only individuals that would know that they're seeking services is within our agency. For our incarcerated survivors, there is a different, especially for Pleasant Valley, we do have a different protocol that they follow when they're wanting to seek services. So that is making contact with the PCM, the PREA coordinator manager. So they have extra steps that they have to follow, and when doing that, there's more individuals around them that are being made aware that they're wanting or seeking out the services.
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of the same comments in that safety is a concern for them, and the lack of services or the accessibility of these services and how that is important. When comparing the support that you're providing to a male survivor outside in the community to one inside detention. And then, Claudia, can you share a little bit about the challenges that you've encountered and maybe even how you've overcome them?
Okay. So the challenges that we've encountered, I want to say this was more true at the beginning of our journey, and that was establishing a relationship in communication with Pleasant Valley. I feel once we were able to do that and we overcame that during our site visit, I think that was very helpful, seeing and being able to meet in person versus phone calls or emails, and making that one-on-one contact with Lieutenant Lopez was very beneficial to us. Since then, communication has not been something that we've had a challenge with. After our site visit, I feel like everything just kind of was set into place, and since then we've been able to maintain great communication with our CDCR facility.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Now, can you share a little bit of what you've learned about working with male survivors behind bars?
Some of the things that we've learned with working with our male survivors, so one of them is just that we want to focus on the individual and their assault. So we want to see past the CDCR number and not ask questions as to why they were incarcerated, but just focus on the individual as we would if that individual was out in the community, and not ask any additional questions. And we would also want to learn a little bit more about their history, not as why they're in prison, but more of like maybe if they have a history of abuse or child abuse, or if this if they have a history of sexual abuse. So we want to, because those are all things we want to take into consideration when we're providing services, because that is something out that they're also dealing with. So it's not just a sexual assault that maybe took place behind bars, but something that they've had with them and that they're carrying on and also trying to cope with, in addition to the rape in prison.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that you shared to, take some time to learn their history, right? One of the things that we know about male survivors is that their history has a big role in the way that they're going to respond to the services moving forward. So thank you for highlighting that as well. Can you share with us some things to consider when we are, as advocates, doing the work with male survivors behind bars?
Yes, so some of the things to consider, I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but that's establishing a reliable contact person at the facility. That for us has greatly worked out on behalf, just making that contact and also having a backup to the backup to the backup. So just in case I'm not able to make contact with our PREA coordinator at the prison. So we do have a backup to him, so who we are able to reach out to. Also taking into consideration safety precautions. So just being aware that it is a prison that we're walking into, so, just keeping that in mind. Also learning CDCR protocols. So there's a lot of things that, because it's not our home and we're going into their home, so we want to make sure that we still have a good relationship. We're there to provide services to our survivors, but when doing that, we got to be aware that this is still a prison, and there's we want to be mindful of those that work there. So just learning protocols, and just, we don't want to be seen as someone who walks in and then just kind of does our own thing. We want to be able to fit in while still doing the work that we're wanting to do while being there. And then when saying that, also being respectful of the prison culture, and then focus on service delivery. And what I mean by that is just focusing on survivors' needs, being respectful, being mindful, and just identifying creative and innovative services delivery options. And then just being aware of our limitations as well. I think that's a big one, being aware of what limitations we're faced with as a RCC, also limitations for CDCR and for the survivor as well. And then always seeking clarification, always asking questions. That is something that I'm always doing with our PREA coordinator and manager at the facility. I'm always emailing him and asking questions when I need further clarification, and he's really great at getting back to us right away.
Yeah, thank you. And, I just want to circle back and recap that all the things that you said are important, to go through and identify as an advocate, so that at the end of the day, these services that you are going to focus on delivering are, highlighted and are at the top priority. If you need to understand the protocol in order to provide these services, then, do a little bit of the homework and have these conversations with your PCNs. I know that Captain Stark shared with us last week that, just ask the question, right? Reach out to your PCMs, reach out to your facility and ask the questions that are going to help you provide those services to those behind bars. Thank you so much, Claudia and Julia, for sharing this with us today. We really appreciate all you do and all the amazing work that you continue to do at Pleasant Valley.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Women's Center High Desert. Women's Center High Desert is in Ridgecrest, California. They actually provide services to two facilities, the California Correctional Institute in Tehachapi and the California City Correctional Facility. I know Mona was having some trouble with her computer, but I'm not sure if she's on the phone or not. Mona, are you there with us?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning, Mona. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing well. Thank you, Mona. So, Mona, Women's Center High Desert is, like I said, at a different level from other facilities, from other rape crisis centers. Women's Center High Desert actually has two, groups going on at both their facilities, and Mona is providing one-on-one services. So she has a lot of access and a lot of time inside these facilities, so they have a lot of hands-on experience, I guess, with providing the service to male survivors. Mona, can you share a little bit with us on the differences between working with men in the community to those who you are servicing right now in your facilities?
Well, I think probably what stands out to me the most are the politics in the facilities. They have their own politics. obviously a lot of people or a lot of the guys that would come into a nonprofit or to get help out in the community have probably served time. They still will bring their politics with them when they come to get help on the outside also.
Mm-hmm. And what about some challenges that you've encountered?
My biggest challenge is probably me being a black woman. A lot of times me working with Hispanic men or white men, I don't know if they're always comfortable with me being a black woman, and I let them know right away that I have many clients from different class, cultures, background, and that my experience is varied. So I let them talk until they're comfortable enough to actually be specific in why they requested my services. And that seems to work.
Yeah, and I think, you've shared before that it's important to be transparent with the way and with these communications or these dialogues that you're having with the survivors. And Mona, just, to take you back a little bit, can you share a little bit more about what you mean when you're talking about having their own belief systems or their own politics?
Yeah, well, each facility is going to have a different belief system. Some are going to be separated by race. Some, because of gang activity, they will be separated off. But I need to know that in dealing with each facility, what the politics are, because I want to speak to them and let them know that I understand who they are and not disrespect that this is where they came from. I do let them know, especially if it has anything to do with gangs, that I don't agree, but I will respect who you are. And that has really gotten me far when I tell them that.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think it's important to understand, again, we emphasize it and repeat it often, the culture in these facilities in order to provide these services more appropriately for our survivors. Yeah, Mona, can you share a little bit about the things that you've learned when working with this population?
Well, obviously, most of the time, men are going to have a problem in opening up about being attacked to a woman. I know that I have to have more patience when dealing with a man, and not that it's always easy talking to women about sexual violence, but for men, they are always worried about what women think when they tell us things. So I know that they're going to be on guard, and again, I give them time to open up. Sometimes it's not going to happen on the first or one or two visits, so I know that I have to keep going, letting them know that they can trust me, showing up on time, being loyal to our confidentiality, and that helps a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing, Mona. And just to wrap things up a little bit, can you share some things that you feel we should consider when doing this work?
Well, I think it's important to never expect a pat on the back or trying to go into a facility to make a name for yourself. There are going to be individuals that will show their appreciation, and that's great. You do want to feel like you're making a difference, but it's important to know that this is a different culture, this is a different mindset, and they're not always so kind. So and I'm very privy to understanding that I'm there to do a job. I'm not there to even make friends, but I'm there to be kind and to be patient and understanding of what you're telling me.
And I feel like great way of wrapping things up, Mona, in that it's important to understand our roles, right? And understand how when we're showing up to these facilities, we're there to provide support. So we have a role, and we need to respect that role, and we also need to identify those challenges that we might encounter with the role that we have. And as advocates who are females, providing these services to a male survivor who might not feel like you have enough understanding because you are a female, right? So just being aware of these things as well.
Yes, very aware of everything.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mona, for sharing. Women's Center High Desert has been doing an amazing job in providing services now in both their facilities, and they have a very successful program going on as well. So if any of you have any questions, Women's Center High Desert would definitely be one to talk about these things as well as their other peer leaders. And now, thank you, Mona, again. And I'd like to introduce Sure Helpline. Sure Helpline is in El Centro, California, so they're on the border of Mexicali and California, and they provide services to Calipatria State Prison and CST Centinela. And from Sure Helpline, we have Kenya. Hi, Kenya.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning. Kenya, thank you for joining us today. Sure Helpline is also doing a lot of work in providing services to male survivors. They have an amazing connection with the ICE facilities over there, and as much work as they're doing, they, just like all of us are encounter some challenges to doing the services or providing services to their CDCR facility. But now they've been more successful in building that relationship, so hopefully things are going to start moving a little bit more for them. Kenya, can you share with us a little bit on the differences, because you do a lot of work with men in the community, the differences between the work that you're doing with incarcerated men versus men in the community?
I think just working with men, it is already hard because they're kind of hard to get through in the beginning. But somebody mentioned that men in community have more ways to cope than men in facilities. First of all, the so-called shot callers, they dissuade the victim survivor to get any type of services. Anything dealt with mental health, they do not want to know about, because there's always that one leader that if they know that you're getting services, you for sure know you're already going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit more about what shot callers are?
Well, the shot callers are men in prison that are gang leaders. If there's a Hispanic in the yard, it has to all be Hispanics, because the leader says it's only Hispanics, no other races in the yard. So they're basically, they have their rules set. So like I said earlier, anything with mental health, forget it. They just rather walk away from it.
Thank you. And, just from the brief discussion that Kenya's having with us right now, we circle back to the importance of understanding that language and the culture inside your facilities, because these could be crucial in why you might be seeing a lack of referrals or a lack of requests for services as well. Can you share a little bit? Go ahead, Kenya.
Lack of reporting too. I mean, not a lot of them report for the same reason.
Yeah. And can you share a little bit of the challenges that you've encountered while trying to provide services to male survivors?
Well, I think everybody's facing the same challenges, and going into the facilities, these PCMs think that we're going to interrupt their investigatory process, and now they understand that we don't care about having investigations made. What we care is providing the victim survivor with services so they can really rehabilitate and feel more comfortable. They've gone through a terrible situation. How can they make it better? Besides, they're already anybody that has been through a traumatic experience needs help. Imagine these people. They've seen crimes being committed. They themselves committed crime. They're already traumatized enough, and then to go through something like this in a facility where they should be taken care of, very traumatic. And I think that now the PCMs understand and know that it's really it's like a two-way street. So I think that's
and thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That we as advocates are there to humanize them as well, right? To provide these services, to empower them, and understand that we ourselves have to take a trauma-informed approach when starting these conversations with them. And that staff themselves have their own biases and hesitations, and as advocates, we're going to have to have these conversations with them as we encounter them as a challenge. Kenya, can you share a little bit of what you've learned when working with incarcerated male survivors?
Well, that I've learned that a lot of people, and not me, but I've known people that you have to put your bias aside. You know that if somebody in the community was once an offender, you will probably get that offender become a victim in the facility. I don't know if I explained myself correctly.
No,
you need to have an open mind, because we've had cases where I was raped because I was a child molester. How do we let them know that they're already paying their dues to society, and when they were in front of the judge didn't sentence them to years in prison and a rape? So how do you let them know, and how do you work with yourself and put that aside? I think for a lot of people it's hard, and I think that you have to learn. That's something you have to learn too.
And I like that you mentioned that sometimes the survivors themselves have their own biases, right? Which might become part of their challenges, and why, like you mentioned earlier, the lack of reporting or the lack of, requests for services, and how these biases are within the entire correction community. As advocates, we have our own biases. The PCM does, all the corrections, and just to be aware of these biases so that we can at the end.
They really put in their head that they deserved it. So how do you get them out of that way of thinking?
Yeah, and those are important things to take into consideration when going in there and providing these services. We can't approach all survivors the same way we would approach them out in the community. Kenya, just to wrap it up a little bit, can you tell us some things that we should consider when doing this work, or things that you've done while doing this work?
Become familiar with corrections culture. Remember that our main goal is to provide these victims with services, and also help them rehabilitate.
Yeah, right? Yeah, and I don't think we've heard it over and over again that corrections culture is important, right?
Yeah.
And
so there's a correction portion of it, and anything that we provide in there, it's to rehabilitate them in any way, in any trauma, anything that they've experienced throughout their life. It might not only be sexual, but how can we get through them, and how can we provide a service? That will help them. We be clear about our role. Let the corrections know that we're not investigators. We don't care to be investigators. We just care to be there for the victim survivor, right? And then always demonstrate professionalism, not only with the clients, but with the corrections staff. Build good professional relationships, and build good professional relationships with the victim survivors, like if they were out in the community.
And I think that's important. Go ahead, Kenneth.
No, that's fine. I was done with that.
I think that is important that you mentioned that, to be clear about your role, both with the staff that you're meeting in the facility and with your survivor, and the importance of demonstrated professionalism, because we can encounter many things that could just frustrate us and upset us, right, as advocates, because our goal, just like you said, is to support in that, healing process. So, we can get a little frustrated as well, and that's completely understandable. And by us demonstrating professionalism, we also demonstrate consistency that our role is to provide these services. Thank you so much for sharing, Kenya. And thank you for doing such an amazing job with both your facilities and always being an amazing advocate as well.
Thank you.
And last but definitely not least, we have Valley Oasis. Valley Oasis is in the Lancaster area, and they provide services to the California State Prison, LA County, or CSP LA County. I see Lisa is on. I don't know if Deb is with her or not, but welcome to either one. Do we have anyone from Valley Oasis? It's okay if we don't.
I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm having phone problems.
Oh, it's okay. Hello and welcome.
Welcome. Hi, this is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. Welcome to our web conference. But you were on it. It was just the phone. It's okay. We knew we were going to encounter some technical issues. So, Lisa, can you share, I know the Valley Oasis is doing a lot of work, and you guys have an amazing relationship with your staff as well. We know that you have also an amazing SART response, and you have, I don't want to say easy access to the facility, but it might be a little bit less challenging for Valley Oasis than it is for some of the other rape crisis centers. So, based just on that background, can you tell us a little bit about the differences between working with those incarcerated men versus the men in the community that you might be providing services to?
Sure. Well, for me and for us here in the Antelope Valley, sometimes it's a little bit difficult because working with incarcerated males at times could be hard with trust, because a lot of times somebody out in the community, it's a lot easier to gain their trust, whether than they're incarcerated.
And can you tell a little bit about how it differs in building that report? How is it that, what are some of the things that you might encounter when you're having a conversation with a male survivor inside detention than a male survivor who is not, who's out in the community, and how it might differ in the building that rapport? What happened?
It looks like her phone connection dropped again. I just received I think she just wrote a message on the public forum.
Oh, okay.
Maybe we can go through some of the bullet points, and hopefully she can rejoin.
We can. And Lisa can join us whenever she is able. We're sorry. We knew that we were going to, we encountered some technical issues once in a while. I'd like to move and share a little bit about the challenges that Valley Oasis share with us. They've shared that survivors sometimes can be skeptical about advocates' roles. During the interview, they don't understand, they might not be able to have a clear understanding of what they're there for and what they're going to be able to provide for them. They also, have encountered challenges in meeting the survivor at their level in a consistent and a trauma-informed way. They share a little bit about, how it could be, a challenge when they're in a forensic exam. They share a story that they were asked by an inmate during an interview process to leave because they didn't know that they didn't really understand their role and why they were there, and it was a female, so why do I need a female in there? So, just meeting them at that level, it was important for their advocate, and, just continue the consistency and being trauma-informed in order to provide these services during the forensic exam were important for them as well. So keep those all in mind. And Lisa's trying, and it's okay. Don't stress about it, Lisa. We can keep going and moving forward. We were able to have these responses ahead of time, so no worries there. In the words of Valley Oasis, when we asked them, what they've learned about working with incarcerated male survivors, they share with us that it's important to humanize the inmate. They said that working with PREA, they've learned that men in prison are humans and that they are subject to all types of feelings and the feeling of being vulnerable as well. They might experience the assaults outside and, not inside, and now they become the lack of trust inside, is greater as well. They share that they learned that they have to be mindful of safety. When they were sharing this, they actually shared that safety for themselves and it's important, but it's also important to keep in mind the safety of the survivor. When you're providing these services, how are you approaching them? What are you asking them to do? How is their safety being always top priority for you as an advocate? You learn these things as well. And we also asked them, some things to consider when doing the work and what they would like to share with us. They said that the first thing they like to consider when doing the work under PREA is that anyone who's been assaulted has the right to speak freely about their experiences. And if there's any biases about speaking openly with a prisoner, then this becomes a little bit more difficult. They share that they must learn to listen without judgment of the individual, and that that itself can be a challenge. They found that listening with compassion is essential and helps in the development of that healing process as well.
Yeah, those are all great points.
And thank you, Evaluators. And again, no worries about the technical difficulties.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Sorry for the stress.
Yeah, no worries. And we would like to wrap things up a little bit with expanding the movement and what this means. We want to be at this web conference. We just want to put out there to our rape crisis centers that male survivors is a thing to consider, and it's an important part of our work as well. And that despite the grave and widespread nature of sexual violence against men and boys, we know that the current international human rights framework is inadequate for addressing this problem. The international instrument that contains the most comprehensive and meaningful definition of sexual violence actually exclude men on their face. And reflecting and embedding the assumption that sexual violence is a phenomenon relevant only to women and girls is a big, just a big thing to consider. Men and boys who've been sexually assaulted or abused may have many of the same feelings and reactions as other survivors of sexual assault. But they may also face some additional challenges because of social attitudes and stereotypes about men and masculinity, and all the things that our peer leaders were able to share with us. And based on all the data that we were able to find, we understand that the work that we're doing has to include male survivors as well. Male survivors behind bars, and male survivors in the community, and it's important to keep these things in mind.
Thanks, Juliana, and thanks to all of our amazing guests from the peer leader agencies. This has really been a wonderful time. Before we take any questions, and feel free to start typing them in now as they occur to you in the public forum, we wanted to make you aware of just some of the ongoing resources that you have as you go forward in this work, which can be challenging. Answers to a lot of questions can be found at both JDI and CalCASA's websites. And the place we sometimes find ourselves going for answers is the PREA Resource Center. That's a place we often go for clarification and insight. And as we've been sharing with you, you can also view the most recent audits for your facilities.
Yeah.
That's a very important tool. And although this is a very real problem, and it's a very ongoing problem, what we discussed today with mass incarceration and the way that it over-penalizes men of color. This is also a moment where the culture seems to be taking a pause to actually look at the problem. And there have recently been best-selling books and highly regarded and well-received films receiving mass distribution about this topic. So some of our recommendations for viewing here and reading. The new Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. 13th, a film by Ava DuVernay, which is available to stream on Netflix. Very hard to stop once you get that one started. It's really it's sad, but it's an amazing watch. And we'll be sending along a link to a short video narrated by Jay-Z, done in collaboration with the New York Times, called The War on Drugs is an Epic Fail, as part of our follow-up to this webinar. If anyone has any suggestions that they'd like to add to this list, please feel free to type in, and we will try to include those in our follow-up email as well. And as always, we are here for you. We love hearing from you, and if we don't have the answer right away, we'll get it as soon as we can. You can reach out to members of the California Advancing PREA team at either of these email addresses, and someone will get right back to you. And now it's time for any questions you might have, anything that might have come up during the webinar that you wanted to either get some clarity on, or anything that you've had on your mind for a while.
And just like Matthew said, we will be sharing the web conference, the link to the recording once more and the video. So as you rewatch the web conference and something triggers a question, please feel free to send those our way as well. You know, we know that the conversation with male survivors is, you know, a long and lengthy conversation, and we understand that we might have not covered everything today, but, you know, we look forward to having more in-depth conversations as well. And it doesn't seem like we have any questions just yet.
Yeah, and that's a great, you know, thank you all for kind of walking with us on this journey all the way since year one. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, everyone, for such an amazing web conference series. Again, this is our fourth and final one for year 3. We've done a lot of amazing things in this year, and we've, you know, created a lot of systems change as well, and it's all thanks to you all. We look forward to year 4 and, you know, providing some more amazing web conferences, and, you know, just a reminder that these are all based on your needs and your feedback. So keep those coming and let us know what you want to hear as well. So thank you so much, and please enjoy this picture of when we introduce year 3. Thank you so much, everyone.